as much as you want,
Okay.
even more so than you want.
To officially start us, welcome to the Chicago AWS user group. I am Margaret, your fearless leader. Thanks for coming. My normal slides, I guess. We have an agenda, and it is, we'll talk a little bit, and then Matt will talk and present, and then we'll have questions, and then we're done. Usually there's pizza involved. My only plug tonight is we have a website, chicagoaws.com. It also works for awschicago.com. We have a big red button to join the Slack. So if you're interested in keeping conversation going, go to the website for that. We also have lists of upcoming events. We don't have anything planned for Chicago, kind of figuring out what's next for in-person versus what. I think we officially decided that the Midwest Community Day will be in 2022 because we're just overwhelmed. But Amazon events are virtual, so they're doing like regional virtual, like it used to be the Chicago, whatever you call it, Amazon thing. Now I can't even remember what the name of it is. Summit, the regional summits. Now they're virtual summits. So the ones aimed towards North America are coming up in May, and Europe is in June. So I'll post those in the group. That's all I have, Matt. The floor is yours.
Fantastic. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's do that. Hey, look, that worked. Awesome. So I'll kind of get into this in a second. Again, we have a nice small little group, so I'm going to get pretty informal. Not that I'm really formal when there's lots of people. But really kind of talking about some ideas around the idea of cloud engineering and thinking about what things we can do with some Lambda components using Pulumi. So have to have an intro slide, just a little bit of background. So my name is Matt Stratton. I live here in the Chicagoland area. I live out in Lisle. So as you all, and this on a normal presentation, I would say I live in Chicago. You know how that goes, but I would never do that in one of our local meetups because I know better.
Sure.
I know. Hey, I lived in the city for like 15 years, man. I would have thrown down if someone who lived in Lisle said they lived in Chicago. I'm the global co-chair for DevOps Days. I started and still help run DevOps Days Chicago along with your fearless leader Margaret. I have a podcast called Rest DevOps. I have a silly online game show called DevOps Party Games, which is super fun. And if you know me, you know that my license plate used to say DevOps and now it says Kube Cuddle. So I am evolving with the times. Actually, what happened is I moved to San Francisco for a year, and when I came back, I couldn't get the DevOps plate anymore because I still owned it, but the Secretary of State is a pain in the butt. So it was time for a new one. So anyway, so if you see a black SUV driving around with the license plate Kube Cuddle, I'm that dork. Anyway, couple things kind of before we jump in. And again, I'm on Twitter, whatever. You probably know this. Cool. Just a little bit about this is definitely a quote workshop where you can follow along if you want. It requires you to have had Pulumi installed on your machine and have an AWS account and all that stuff. There is a link to the material I'm using, and we'll send that out if you want to do this yourself later. If you want to follow along and try it, cool. It's really your call. And I want to kind of get into, again, if you know me, you know that I run DevOps Days Chicago and help with one of the organizers of the DevOps meetup, and we don't like vendor talks. This is not supposed to be a vendor talk. I'm excited just to talk about this because I think Pulumi is pretty cool and it's some fun stuff. And but if you know me, you know that I'm not here to sell you or to pitch you or anything like that. But
know me, I gave Matt an extra hard time that he can't be vendory.
She did. We'll see how well I do. But if you do start to get started with Pulumi and you start playing with it, we have our community Slack. You can find me in there. And but also, I'm available on Twitter if you have any questions or just for general silliness, because that's the best part of that. And I'll do a quick little plug. Speaking of Twitter, tomorrow, I think at like 6 o'clock Central, I'm going to be hosting a Twitter Spaces, which is like Clubhouse, but not as, but accessible and not just for iPhones. And we're going to be talking about cloud engineering and what that means. We're not really talking about Pulumi, but talking about this idea of this discipline of cloud engineering, which I'm really excited about. And if you follow my talks or anything, you're going to probably hear me talking about cloud engineering a lot over the next year. But anyway, so, what is this Pulumi nonsense that Matt is so excited about doing? So again, it's really a platform for cloud engineering. And when we're talking about cloud engineering, it's really thinking about this discipline, which is taking these sort of standard software engineering practices and tools across all of the pieces, the infrastructure, the app dev, and compliance, which is really about the things we have to do in modern cloud. So a lot of this sounds like DevOps, a lot of it sounds like SRE maybe, but it's really this discipline of cloud engineering in the modern cloud is where this kind of comes in. So what Pulumi is kind of getting us, it's really before we would have said it's modern infrastructure as code, but it's giving you this sort of one way to kind of do these things. And what we really are talking about is that it's programmatic infrastructure as code. And especially thinking about treating your infrastructure as an API. Whereas I kind of think about it, and again, if you know me, you know that infrastructure as code is where I've been for a long time. I was at Chef for a long time. And I think a lot of what we traditionally have been calling infrastructure as code is infrastructure with code, right? We're not really treating our infrastructure in that way, but we're using some code to build our infrastructure. And this is kind of taking it to the next idea. And it's just really, really, you'll see some of the places where I think it's interesting, but it's whatever your cloud is, whether it's K8s, whether you're Azure, AWS, obviously we're going to be talking about AWS stuff today. And you can, if you want to think about it this way, this is kind of an oversimplification, but like think about like Chef, for example, right? So it's cool. So you could use some programmatic things in Chef, but it was Ruby. You had to use Ruby. What if you didn't know Ruby? Well, now you need to learn Ruby. And you're like, but you know what? I totally love Python. I'd love to write some Chef in Python. Well, too bad for you, or Terraform, your HCL. So the thing is, whatever, I don't want to say whatever, but there's multiple different runtimes. So wherever your application is living, you can write your infrastructure code in the same way and then have access to that high-level programming language. And then all the blah, blah, blah. And I'm not pitching. I'm just, I mostly just wanted to talk about the ideas that you're able to use these different runtimes. And so like, I'll be writing this stuff tonight. We'll be using TypeScript because that's the workshop that I have. But I've actually been doing a lot of it in Go with the stuff I'm doing, because Go is a language that I quote know where that goes. But if you dig Python, Python's there for you, and blah, 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 blah. Okay. So if you were to want to follow along and move this, one of the things you have to have for what we're doing today is to have a Pulumi account. And the thing is, just like you might think about with something like Terraform or whatever, or kind of any kind of infrastructure management, you have to have some way to store the state of the things that we're configuring. And you can do that. There's multiple different state providers. You can, store that in S3. You can store it in local systems and all sorts of stuff. Or one of them is the Pulumi SaaS, and which for individual people like us is free. And of course, if you are going to use it for teams, then you should, then you have to give some money. So that would be what and you'll see as I kind of go in and we look at stuff. The nice thing about the SaaS is that's like kind of letting us see what's going on with stuff. But that's kind of enough slideware. Let me switch over to, I was trying to be really slick with OBS and that didn't work out. So we're just going to do look, I put a couple windows by each other. So what we're going to go through a couple different things here, and we're going to be using Pulumi as the place. The reason I want to think about it is it's really thinking about how we're able to access this stuff programmatically. So we're going to start just provisioning just a simple Lambda function, nothing all that exciting. And we have this thing called Pulumi Crosswalk for AWS, which I've really realized how powerful it is because it's not fully exposed outside of TypeScript just yet, although that kind of changed today, I think. So I went to go try to do some of the stuff like I'm doing in this workshop in Go, and I was like, oh, I have to go build all these pieces now. Crosswalk is a level of abstraction to make it even simpler to deploy these functions. And then we're going to do some Lambda containers to actually build a little microservice that does a little thumbnailing, just sort of see where these pieces go along. And we'll see how that kind of goes. So yeah, if you are, you're responsible, I'm not going to fund your AWS services if you're doing all this stuff. So when we kind of go along here, the first thing we're going to do, so every Pulumi project is basically, it's like you would think of as a software project. It's all of the stuff that to build a Pulumi program, which when we run it, that says what do we want to manage. So you think about it that way. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and create, what do you call that? Lambda. I was going to say a folder. Very smart. Because this is where our simple Lambda function program is going to live. So we kind of see this now. That's cool. There's nothing really in there. Now, when all that a Pulumi project is just a directory with some files, like most programs, right? And you could create all those things, but that sure seems like that would be dumb. So we could go ahead and we're going to say we want to create a new TypeScript, and that's the runtime, but you could also do a new Go, a new Python, etc. And when we go ahead and do this Pulumi new, it's what this is also doing, because I've already at the CLI, I've already logged into Pulumi. So it also created that stack, which is basically a stack is an instance of your infrastructure. So you can see, for example, it said that it created a stack called dev. That's the default one. So, but you can have multiple stacks, and whether they're just different tenants or different stages in your application, usually you think about a stack almost like an environment, but it depends upon what you're building and how you're doing that. So we have kind of our fun, good job. It created some files. What do we got? So because this is TypeScript, so index.ts, this is the main code of our Pulumi program. And this is where we're going to do a lot of our work. Because it's it's TypeScript, so it's Node. So we have package JSON, all the usual packaging things, and our TypeScript settings. None of this we have to really mess with, but if that's a thing you like, you understand how that goes. And so if we kind of look at the default TypeScript, it's basically saying we're importing this library here. And we aren't going to really do much with the other ones. Now, what we need to do is we need this, we say, we want to use the AWS package because that's where we're creating our Lambda function. And so it's just NPM, right? So we're going to NPM install, spoiler alert for the next part of the script, or next part of we're going to NPM install the Pulumi AWS package. And that does normal fun node stuff. And now we'll see, we actually have that now in our package JSON, but we have it, but we need to do something with it, right? We need to use it. So we're just going to import import star is AWS from at Pulumi AWS. And it's going to say that we're not using it because we're not, but we will. Don't worry about it. It's totally cool. The other thing we need to do is we need to tell Pulumi where we're playing in AWS. So we're going to put this in US East 1 because that's where everything goes. And now you can see that we have these Pulumi YAML. So now for our stack, the configuration of this stack, the dev stack, is this AWS region. If I had different stacks, I could have different configurations for them. And I already have these in I'm using the AWS CLI. So the environment variables are all there for my AWS profile, usual stuff that would happen if you're doing AWS things at the command line. So what we want to do, we want to create a simple Lambda function. So if we go back to our Pulumi project, what we want to do is we want to create a role so that it can actually function. This is a piece of it. And so this is where things like kind of get interesting with it being programmatic. So if I go in here and I can just say equals, new AWS, but look, I'm getting all my type ahead because this is all coming from that NPM package. And I don't need to have, any kind of Visual Studio Code snippets or anything like that. This is just like a programming language. So I'm just going to go ahead and, my function role. I will tell you that don't expect that I'm going to be, that thing got in my way again. Okay. you're not going to be watching me type this whole time. I will be copying from this because this is not Mavis Bacon teaches typing. But I wanted to show a little bit about how that autocomplete is happening. So when we say, there's sort of the function of that, the assume role policy, is AWS.IAM assume role policy for principal. And then that has the components underneath it. So for example, the service is Lambda. And then when I did this earlier, I spelled Lambda wrong. Raise your hand if Lambda is hard for you to spell.
Spell it wrong all the time.
Yeah, right. Lamppost. So it fundamentally looks like this. We're sort of saying, okay, assume this role policy for the principal is to use that particular one. So cool. So we got ourselves a role. That's not going to get us very far because we actually need a function. And so in this particular case, because you don't need to watch me type, but then we'll kind of look at what it is, right? So we're creating another constant because this is giving us the ability to access it programmatically. And this is saying, okay, but then we have role. So instead of having to get the ARN from that, because it's a programmatic object, we can pull this back. And you'll see this is a thing that's really powerful in this is we can continually refer to these variables and these objects that we create. And this is just a very simple little return 200 hello world, very exciting. Let's do this. We'll personalize it so that you don't think that I'm cheating. We'll say hello, Margaret. Okay. And then now that's cool. So now we have a very simple Pulumi program. What we want to do though is we want to see, we're going to kind of preview our changes. So for that, we run this command, which is Pulumi up. And Pulumi up is when it's going to go out there and it's going to say like, okay, run your program, do the things in the program, make the infrastructure look like this. But what you'll see is it starts with the preview. It doesn't actually do anything yet. It's saying, okay, if you were to run this, here's what's going to happen, right? We're going to create this role and we're going to create this function. And if I clicked on this link, it would take me to the console, web console, where I'd be able to see this, but we can see what we want to do here. And if I even went in and I said details, if I was really wanted to be nerdy, I could see this is actually, because over here it just said it was going to create some stuff, but you're like, Pulumi, why don't you tell me what you're going to create? So we can see all that. And in this case, it says, do you want to perform this update? And, I do. So we're going to let this chug away. And so now it's going and it's actually going and creating these. And one of the things that's really important is the console, or not the console, but rather where your state is located, understands this happening so that you're not sort of having these orphan things that are hanging out. And that'll be real important when we want to get rid of this stuff so that we don't have I don't have some 85-cent a month bill hanging out and I have to, reach out to the duckbill group and have Corey help me with my thing. So we can see it says, okay, went and created these three things. So that's cool. And now we created this function, but we don't really know anything about it. And the thing is, so Pulumi kind of auto generates this function name. And what we can do with our Pulumi program is we can export variables that are shown in the CLI and they're recorded for the deployment. So they could be useful to us outside of running inside of our Pulumi program. And you can actually get really clever if you're building this inside of your CI or CI CD pipeline. When you kick those out from the console, you could shove those into an environment variable in your build because something in the next part who's actually handling something else might need to know about the infrastructure that you've just created. So we're going to, at the end here, we're just going to export our function name, and which is just, remember we created Lambda function up there and it has a property called name. Cool. So if we go ahead and we Pulumi up again, this will be very exciting because now we're going to know, after it goes ahead and does its thing. And actually I could have skipped the preview part of that and just said -- yes, because it didn't change anything. I don't have anything to preview. I'm just getting some value. So you can see it gave me this my function, and then it has an auto-generated name for uniqueness. You can override that when it creates that function name. There's ways if you really felt strongly about making sure that it was set. So if we wanted to actually trigger this function that we just created, that's fun. Let's do some lambdaing. And you can see, that we pulled back this variable, this execution of the Pulumi stack output, which And that just tells us that the function executed successfully, which is fine. And I'm very excited about it. But now I want to clean up after myself. So if I just say Pulumi destroy, what that's going to do is everything in the stack where I'm currently running, it's going to get rid of it. And it's warning me here and says, are you sure? Do you want to delete these things? I say, I sure do, because they aren't doing anything good for me right now. And it'll go ahead and clean those things up for me. And then if I want to get rid of the stack on the Pulumi side, which I do because I don't really care anymore, I can say, you know, Pulumi stack RM. I delete the stack, say I want to delete dev. And so on the Pulumi side, that's all gone. It obviously doesn't do anything to my local file system. And I could always go and recreate the stack again if I wanted to. So this is just really basically the gist. And what I want to think about here is that we did this programmatically. And it's really helpful when you have the tools available to you within whatever your IDE is. I'm using VS Code, but if you're using, you know, Vim with whatever autocomplete plugins, and it was able to load all of that stuff depending upon your particular programming language. So when I was doing this, when I write my Pulumi programs in Go, I have all of the fun stuff that I'm used to having as, I almost said as a Go developer. I wouldn't call myself a Go developer, but I pretend to be one. So which means I get to pretend to use the tooling. So that was cool, but you're like, okay, you know, who actually just wants to spin up one function? That doesn't seem very exciting. So I hear you, and we're going to do something else a little cooler. So we're going to create an API gateway now, because this is just sort of, again, another level of component of stuff when we're thinking about Lambda that we might want to do. So we'll go ahead and create ourselves a Lambda API gateway and cd Lambda API gateway. Puts us in our thing. Cool. And we'll get rid of our old simple Lambda function. And look, we have nothing in there. This is very similar thing. We're just going to say Pulumi new TypeScript. We're going to create our new fellow here, and it's going to look very similar. But one of the things we're going to do a little bit different this time is because now we're going to use this thing called crosswalk, which is because when you think about it, when you create an API gateway, there's a lot of other things that you have to create to make that work. And it'd be kind of nice if you didn't have to go through and deal with all of that stuff. So first thing we're going to do is we need to go back, and now there's two packages this time. We had the AWS package like we used in the last one, but now we're using this AWS X package, which is the package we call, you know, that we call crosswalk. So we'll npm install those. And this is, again, like when I'll tell you when we kind of go into it, the crosswalk thing really, I noticed how helpful it was when I tried using, creating some Fargate stuff without it. Because first I was like, okay, I want to create, you know, I want to shove a container up into, I want to create a cluster in Fargate. Okay, I did it in like 4 lines of TypeScript with the crosswalk provider. And then I went to do it in Go, and it was like 40 lines, because every little piece you need to get a Fargate cluster going, I had to go and create rather than it being inferred. So cool. So we got our friends over there, and then now we need to actually import all those packages, usual stuff. Again, that would kind of work however. Oops, there we go. And we need to set our region, as we talked about before. Cool. Okay, we're in US East because that's where everything goes. Now, this time around, we're going to go and we're going to create our function. And but before we declare that, we're going to create an API gateway. And this is very similar to what we did before, where we just do it in new. But this time, since we're using AWS X, it's good. We have API gateway dot API, and then we'll say hello to Steve this time, until I remember the part when I refer to this by name and forgot. And then we go ahead and create our routes, right? Because it's an API gateway. So we're just sort of saying like everything that's coming off of just slash is going to be just a get. Nice and simple. We got our event handler. And then what do we actually want to return on the event, right? We basically want to say, status code is 200 and oops. Okay, what did I forget? I missed something in here. Our routes. Nope, that's right. Okay.
Lines.
I got it there. Yeah, I typoed the thing. Okay. So, but because that those pieces that go in there, so kind of same kind of deal as before when we do our Pulumi up. But what's interesting about this, as you'll kind of see, all of the resources it's going to create based just upon that, right? Because when we did the AWS X API gateway, it knows it needs to do a bunch of other things. And this is all the stuff that without Crosswalk, you would have to then you'd have to create all these different resources. So let's say, cool, go ahead and deploy our change, get some stuff going. And it's going to kind of, if we were to go into here, it would again take us into all those resources. This takes a few minutes. So when we're thinking about the next thing we want to do is we want to be able to get that URL of the API. And because we have a logical name that comes off of that gets generated. So if we want to say, just like we exported the function name before, now we can export what the API URL is. And then, like we said, if I do Pulumi up -s yes, then it skips the preview because I don't need to preview the thing that I already did, because really all the change we made here was just to dump out that URL so we can access that a little bit later. And so now that we have that output URL, if we actually curl it, we can see what comes out of that, right? And then we get hello world. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy, but we want to do a little bit more. That was just sort of giving us our get, but we want to add another route to it for post, right? So we had this path, which was /, which was basically saying return that as a get, but now we need to create another route. And then that's sort of, so if we come off of our friend over here, right? So we're going to create that, and then we're going to build in a new one here. And then this is going to be path, and this is going to be off of encode. So that anything that's coming off of encode is going to be our post. And again, in the interests of not having you have to watch me type everything, because I actually kind of want to get to the next one. If we go ahead and just pull this one off. Just want to make sure I've got the. Should get us where we want to go. Okay, but what we did fundamentally there is on encode, we did a little bit more. We said, okay, if it's going to take whatever it's coming from that we send, and that's what it's going to kick back out. It's going to base64 encode it. So now if we create that function, or create that route rather, we're going to Pulumi up it. Very exciting stuff. So again, it had to update a couple of these, had to create a couple of these because things are a little different. Some of these take a couple seconds because AWS. Okay, so then when we pull that out, so if I actually now, if I hit that on a post and I send it foo, I'm basically saying I want you to encode foo. And I got a 404. And I feel like this happened to me when I tried to do this earlier. What did I do wrong? Because it can't find encode.
Matt, does it have to be slash encode?
I don't think it does, because that's why I just want to make sure I got that that route in there in a way that it's gonna come back, because it should be, let's see if we're just sort of confirming, comes body, this. Yep, no, that should be right. That's what it was. Okay, sorry, cold start. So Lambda. So yeah, so it worked. And then the thing is, what we can do is we can actually take a look at the logs, and we'll see this better in the next one, because this is the one I didn't fix with the rights that the role has to have the right to CloudWatch. But this is basically pulling your CloudWatch logs. And we can go ahead, we're going to delete this one. And the next one is definitely much more fun. Oops. Yes. Clean up after myself. Because in the next one we use containers, and how do you even DevOps if you aren't using containers? Oops. Okay, cool. Let's get on to this next one. And in this one, what we're going to do is use some containers in Lambda to actually do some stuff inside our Lambda function. So we're going to create this container for this thumbnailer, which is SFmpeg, and we're going to define our container function and then make a little website that does the things. So cool. Okay. Okay, so we've got our Lambda thumbnailer, which nothing happened in that yet. Cool. The thing, and we haven't really dug into it here, but like what I've been thinking about with this is how you're connecting your deployment and your infrastructure as close as possible, as it makes sense to reason about, with the application itself. So right now we've had this really simple stuff where actually the code of the functions are just in the Pulumi project, Pulumi TypeScript file, because it's very simple. But I've seen stuff that I've been doing where I'm like, okay, I'm actually going to bring this in, or again, maybe have a step in my CI CD that's going to handle this piece, but I can export what I get out of it into there. Cool, normal stuff. Let's just get past all this. Again, we're going to need to get our NPM packages in there. And let's go ahead and add them in. We're going to pull those in. And again, I should just, okay, that's sort of our basic infrastructure of our thing. All right, so now we're going to create an app directory, which is where we're going to put our Docker file. And then if you kind of take a look at what we're going to do here, it's not super important. I did it. There we go. That'll show you Docker file. So what our container is basically doing is we're basically going to be using FFmpeg to create a thumbnail of a video that we upload. So we just have to get FFmpeg on there. That's the fun thing. That's all that we're doing with our Docker container, is making sure it's got FFmpeg. And then we're going to create an entry point on the Lambda container by creating our index.js. Oops. There it is. Okay. And this is what is going to go in there and is the command that's going to sit there. It's going to record the bucket name, and it's going to take as we pass the bucket information that we're going to create in Pulumi over to this, it's going to take a video. As we upload a video to that, it's going to generate the thumbnail and then put it in the appropriate bucket. So if we go back into our Pulumi program again, what we're going to do is we are going to build a Docker image based on that Docker file, and then we're going to push it to the container registry repository. Now, you could do this if you had if you didn't have it in ECR, you had it in Docker Hub somewhere else. There's all sorts of ways we can pull that container. Fun fact, I am doing this workshop on my personal laptop and not my new one from work, because my new one from work is an M1, which means it builds ARM containers, which, you know, I would have to have changed all the content, which I would have, but that's not what we had. I actually did that the other day. I learned all the fun things about BuildX and multi-platform Docker containers. So that said, you should still get an M1 because I still think it's pretty good. Okay, so what we're going to do here, if we think about it, we're creating our image. So this again is letting us use now, instead of API before, as we actually have a method of build and push image. And again, because this is all from this NPM package, we have context-aware documentation that tells us what these methods do. And it says the result is going to contain both that repository as well as the ID for that build image, which we can then use for some other stuff. And so we've got that particular piece. So if we want to go ahead and say, let's get that Docker image created. I don't know what this is. Don't save. There we go. Okay. If we want to go ahead and get that Docker image created, we can again do our friend Pulumi up. This is going to take a couple little bit longer because, you know, it's got to now create the image using the Docker runtime that's on my machine. So this part, you know, was super fast because it's like, cool, just do that, right? And you're like, okay, now go Dockerize that stuff. Because it's sitting there and behind the scenes, it's creating the Docker image on my machine, which it then will push up to ECR. And if I didn't have Docker running, it would have already complained about that, as I learned the other day as well. Let me just, I did that right. Okay. I can never decide how much of this is me being impatient and how much is just that infrastructure takes time.
Or it's the demo gods that know.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember because I feel like I hit a thing here too where I did something dumb before. That why it's taking the time that it's taking. Let's for funsies. Come on, Chrome. There you get out of the way. Okay, you know what? In the time that I was going to see what was happening, it finished. Yep, that's exactly what happened last time. Is I was like, let me go look at the console, and by the time I did that, it was good to go. So again, if we take a look, and you can see that it went ahead, it created that image, and we have that up in the registry. Now we need a bucket, an S3 bucket, where we are going to, because we're going to be uploading videos, we need a place for them to go, and then the thumbnails that it creates. Now, again, trying to be cognizant a little bit around time and what's interesting. But if we kind of look through what this is doing, so again, we've got this bucket, which is using an S3, and it's just going to give us a little bucket called thumbnailer, very simple. But then we need to give the access from those things. And there's actually, because AWS deprecated one of the roles, there used to be managed policies, and it was called AWS Lambda Full Access, which gave you almost everything. But then I found that you also have to give it basic execution role if you wanted to actually be able to write to CloudWatch. But again, what we're doing here is we're creating our roles that we're going to then use when we create our Lambda function, right? So we got those in there, and now we want to create. We're going to end up creating actually two functions, but this first one is this thumbnailer function, right? And this is a new Lambda function, which we're going to call thumbnailer. Get out of my way. And this is an image, right? Because this is what's using that container. And then the image URI is the image value from remember when we created image up at the top. And then the role is the ARN of that first role that we created, which was assuming the role policy. And then we're just going to say time that out 900 milliseconds, because that sounds like a good time for everybody. No pun intended. But then we also want this function to trigger when we upload files. So this is absolutely what I'm not going to make you watch me type, but I want to step through it again too. So now we're saying on new video, basically it's going to say anytime you get a .mp4, right? It's going to go ahead and it's going to create this new thumbnail, which is going to then go put into the bucket. And again, this needed to have these particular things, and it's saying you're going to put in a .jpg. That is fundamentally what our upload is going to do. It's saying we have two events. One of the events is waiting for the videos to be uploaded to the bucket, which is the thing we're going to do, but it's only videos with the suffix mp4. That happens, then it triggers that container. And then the second function waits until that thumbnail is written, and then it calls back, giving us a message to tell us that it's there and where we can find it. Now, we want to know where they're going to come from, or I'm sorry, where we're going to put them. So we again have that ability to Command Z. We can export a variable, again called bucket name, which is just going to give us that bucket ID. And now we're pretty much ready to get this cat going. So we can go ahead and do a Pulumi up. And this time we'll be able to get what our bucket name is, because we're going to use that to put the videos in and then find the thumbnail from later. Yes, go ahead. And this time, because the image hasn't really changed, this is a little faster. But it creates a whole bunch of new resources because we created those bucket policies and all that other fun stuff. And I'm trying to remember where I saved this cat MP4 to from before, because we need an example video. In fact, in the meantime, let's do this. Yes, I know I'm screen sharing. Oh my God, it's in my there. Okay. Okay, now that's done there. We've got our cat, and it's just okay. So now that we've pulled that, now we have our bucket name. Now we know where we want to upload it. So this is just going to let us sit there and say, okay, we're going to take cat.mp4, and because we now know the bucket name, and we can stick it up in there and give it, moving cat videos around on the internet. Very exciting. So now if we were to go in and do Pulumi logs, which takes a hot second because cold start, there we go. So we can see that it went and it it actually called the video handler and did the things that we were expecting it to do for the most part. And then it should, there we go. Now we can see, why did it not like that? An error occurred calling the head object. So it's trying to copy. Okay, this is, I was, am I not? Oh, we don't have a bucket policy on there yet. So it doesn't actually have the ability to write to that just yet. So that's okay. We'll get that in the next one. I just was updating all of this content today. So now if we actually go to our, we have our bucket to store videos and thumbnails, but we actually need to create the bucket policy underneath that. And that's what's going to let all this stuff. Okay, you need to go away, all you extra spaces. Nope. There we go. And this is, oh, I missed one. There we go. Okay, effect. I thought I caught these. We do. Okay, the principal is start. Okay, yep, because it's ARN there. And then I think the other thing that I found was that the resource actually also had to be. And this also needs to be, this should be, see, I thought I caught those in the PR. Okay. This was stuff that I realized earlier because it doesn't have put, right? And then we want to export at the end. So now when we take this guy, we're good to go. We can go ahead and do our Pulumi up again. What I'm wondering, I just realized something. I wonder if that's why. Yep. Okay. This was cached from before I pushed the changes to the workshop content, which is why the code was wrong. Okay. So we did that. Now, if we were to go back in again and now put our cat file back up there again, and this all runs. And then if we say Pulumi logs, which takes a second, because again, cold start, so we can see that nothing is, or 5 past. Okay. Make sure I did that right. It's ARN S3 principal action. Yep. Okay. And then we should be able to, oh, no, we missed a step. Okay. If we were to go to all websites should have cat.jpg as their index file, I think. This is pretty much the last piece of this. So I think the thing to me, again, where this comes in is that when you're kind of trying to build the stuff, and if you don't really know all of the resources, you don't have to go read on the document. It's the same thing about anything when we're building with a library that becomes available to us in our IDE is where these pieces come in. Okay, so now let's go ahead and put him back there. And it'll just, again, we're still sort of sitting. You have to wait a few minutes for Lambda to catch up. Yeah, so that kind of brings us to kind of the end of how this would work. And I'll give the links and we'll go check this out in a few minutes to make sure that our cat image is showing up. There we go. Yep. So now if we were to go and sit there and say, now that we have our website and we want to pull it down. So if we, oops. Yeah, so if we were to go to the output that came from, which now we've lost because of the logs. Here we go. So in theory now, if I go to, there's our cat. There we go. Success. We got ourselves a cat. Kind of talked through these pieces. And again, that's kind of where we went to. We've got more workshops, more offline workshops. One of the things, if you found this slightly entertaining, I have been, as I'm going through and learning Pulumi, I've been live coding that on Twitch. That is not me doing demos or pre-planned content. I'm just sort of sitting and trying to solve a problem. And I do that pretty much every Wednesday at 2:00 Central. So if you go to twitch.tv/the_Matt_Stratton and follow me there, it can be a lot of fun. It's very, very interactive, and you can hopefully learn some things. And if you are curious, the reason why I have to be the Matt Stratton on Twitch is that when we started doing DevOps party games, we did it on my Twitch channel, which was Matt Stratton, and now that channel is basically just for DevOps party games. And long story short, renaming channels in Twitch sucks. So I'm at least the Matt Stratton for the next 6 months.
We should talk to someone at Amazon about that.
It's annoying because also it doesn't do how in GitHub when you rename an org or whatever, it'll redirect to the new location. So if you go to twitch.tv/Matt_Stratton, it just goes, I don't know what you're talking about, even though that was renamed to something else. So gotta love it. So yeah, I would say, what questions can I answer for you? I will say, what questions can I answer for you? And again, I will say, bear in mind, I'm not a product expert by any means, which is good because we're just talking about ideas. And this is usually when we would pump DevOps Day Chicago, but you might have to wait until next year.
Yeah, Matt, my name is Mario. Can you hear me or no?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you remember you said initially best practices, so those function when you build them, are you using some sort of best practices function? There is giving roles, giving, certain type of things.
Yep.
You are. So,
that's coming from the AWS X package.
Okay.
So that's what that's giving you. You could totally do this bespoke, you know what I mean? If you didn't want to just sort of say like function, you know, when you create the function, it creates all those resources. You could create those all, but the idea of crosswalk, which is what that additional library was, or additional package, is that's using common practices around that. And again, since it's all open source, you know, you could look at the package and see what is it actually doing.
Okay.
Yeah, but like I said, when I went to do this in Go the other day, because we don't have crosswalk on, the Go package isn't published yet. I had to go create all those things individually. So it's yeah, it you know, which is then all the more places where I could actually mess it up, right, and not follow a good practice, you know. So it's kind of encapsulated in that.
Okay, good. Yeah, you know, I mean, that's what I was thinking. Okay, yeah, that's good. So in compared to Terraform and this tool, there are some, this is a little more flexible in terms of languages, or how is this different?
Well, right, because with Terraform, and putting a pin in this for a second. So Terraform, you're not using a program, you're using HCL, right? So it's basically YAML. Now they did, Terraform does have a very alpha thing that they call the Terraform CDK, which lets you write in a similar way, but I don't know how far, and then the Terraform is great, but like the entire idea around approaching infrastructure as code this way is kind of contrary to how Terraform thinks about it. So I don't know how much I would think that their CDK is really something that will be invested in a lot, because it is a little contrary to Terraform's thought on how things work. This could be thought of as, again, similar to Amazon CDK, but that's like wrapped around CloudFormation templates. This is all still going. And one of the things that we announced a whole bunch of stuff today. Today was a big day at Pulumi. It was our 3.0. And one of the things was native providers for Azure and for GCP. The Amazon one is coming. And the reason native providers matter is there's some stuff in Pulumi that works through wrapping Terraform. So that's actually an easy way. If you already have Terraform, you can wrap Pulumi around that. The native providers are basically all talking directly from an API perspective to how the provider wants to work. So you don't have this sort of like, it's run, like if you think about like how a lot of like Terraform and parts of Pulumi, the non-native Pulumi, it's really behind the scenes kind of running like the AWS CLI, right? In a native provider, you're talking directly to the API. Yep. So you get all that programmatic goodness. So that's one of the big differences.
Some sort of a performance-wise, you know, you are seeing some sort of, some benefits to it, right?
And so I think the big difference between this and other ones to me is thinking about, having been in the infrastructure as code space for a while, is sort of realizing the ability to treat your infrastructure as an API, right? As a thing that you're dealing with programmatically. And because what you're needing to do, infrastructure is always part of something else, right? And there's more to it than, you know, the same way that like someone say like, okay, I could use CDK to configure my infrastructure, but your infrastructure is not just Amazon, and not talking about even multi-cloud. You just have other things you do that are part of your infrastructure. So you want to keep those things together. And a lot of this idea was things that we wanted to do back when I was doing Chef. Like all my customers wanted to be able to say, okay, cool, so I can do this, but how do I like get it registered in PagerDuty, right? Or whatever. Or we have this other place where we have to log it and do all this. So we're seeing a lot of people are building automation platforms inside their organization. Same way that you would say, you know, Kubernetes is a platform for your applications. You know, you want to build a platform for your automation. So when it's not just, you know, again, the entry point to thinking about this is running Pulumi up, but really it'd be great to get away from even that. And you're just saying it's just an API, right? That we reason about. Yeah.
So the API uses some best practices too, you know, based on, remember you used the gateway API example. So there are a lot of things you have to pick up those API, good practices, functions, and Pulumi new version has some new things. 3.0 you said, right? 3.0.
Yeah. I think this is a good entry point as well for software engineers who are wanting to get these resources going for them. And it's like, okay, again, I come from an ops background, right? So a lot of this stuff makes sense. I'm like, I understand how the infrastructure works, but being able to, whether you're the software engineer that's coming into wanting to do this, or you're providing a platform, I'm a big believer in you provide the abstraction to be able to solve the problem you need. Because again, the problem that I have with my application is not how do I configure an S3 bucket. It's I have to get my application going and consuming. I have to consume this thing. I have to consume that thing. So the idea that as I'm thinking about when we talk about like cloud engineering and the stuff that really is not Pulumi specific is how do we think about this world that we live in cloud, and what does it mean to provide these platforms and work beyond just the idea of like cloud native from a CNCF perspective or a Kubernetes perspective, but it's all of these things together.
All are tied in together. All are basically tidying in, right? The code and things. Okay, yeah, that's very interesting. Yes. So I will look into it and see, if we have some time to spend on these things.
All right, I had some questions, Matt.
Yes.
Since
since you get a
since no one else is here except the four of us.
Right. So we'll just chat.
Yeah. So I'm kind of coming from a Terraform background.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways I look at this and I go, okay, I can see flavors of like CDK, but instead of them saying, oh, you have to use TypeScript or JavaScript, you can use whatever language you want. And I see like, like for instance, the native stuff. I was very surprised that the Amazon one wasn't first because they're the biggest cloud provider. And you're here at the Amazon
I will talk
meetup,
to you.
so
I will
Margaret
talk to you
needs to snack
offline.
you.
I can't.
Okay.
We are recording
I'll
right
tell you-
now, so it's.
But I tell you, having used Terraform for a while, it's very frustrating because Amazon will make a change and then you got to wait for somebody to create this like boilerplate wrapper around it. This happened to me just last week. I was doing something with like cloud formation or cloud front signed URLs. So they introduced like a new, like specifying some keys on a CloudFront distribution. And it's like, oh, shoot. It's not in the Terraform provider. And then you got to track down who's doing the work. So the idea that, you guys can, transpile it quickly into something usable immediately is very appealing. So the native, I like the native stuff. But, we do have a lot of existing stuff, right? So let's say I have a lot of Terraform. I say, okay, I'm going to try Pulumi. I'm going to need an import.
You absolutely have it. You absolutely have it. No,
Perfect.
so there's two things. And actually it kind of blew my mind when Joe was telling me about the second one, because coming from the way I used to do stuff. So there is a, Terraform to Pulumi import that is very battle hardened, like thousands of projects have gone through it. It's because that's a common need. But what you can also do, which kind of blew my mind, is if you have an infrastructure already in AWS, you can import that into Pulumi and it will create the infra code. And it's the reason I said it blew my mind is everybody always wanted that in Chef and Puppet and stuff. And we always said, no, that's a bad idea. And it's true because it's a bad idea for configuring a node. Because the reason is I'm like, Chef has no idea to know the things that you made. But when you talk about an AWS infrastructure or whatever, that's somewhat defined, right? A Linux machine could have 1,000 or not even 1,000, could hundreds of thousands of different configuration dials on it or whatever. They're fundamentally are only so much. So it's actually feasible to say, point this importer at this infrastructure and give me the Pulumi code. But you can also import Terraform 100%. Yep.
Okay. If you don't have the Terraform and it's just sort of in there, so if you're dealing with like, let's say an account that's been around forever, it never made it in the Terraform, nobody's ever written the code for it. Generally what you do is you say, okay, I'm gonna write what I think is the Pulumi code, and then you kind of do the deltas until the delta's 0, right? You do like whatever the equivalent is of a Terraform plan, but in Pulumi code, right?
Right.
Until the deltas, you say, point it at this thing, now compare it, and when the delta's 0, you've reached parity. So like obviously on one end, like being able to suck in a whole account or, based on tags or whatever, that's
Yeah,
great.
you don't really say. I mean, like you kind of point
Sometimes
it
you
towards,
just want to point it at one thing.
No,
right?
that's how it works.
Okay.
Yeah, you would sit there if you do Pulumi import, you basically would say, I want to import this bucket, for example.
Okay.
I mean, you can do more to it, but it's at that level,
cool.
right? You're like, here's these resources, and then you basically adopt them.
Right.
And then
presumably,
you can also,
while you're working here in this sort of demo mode, using sort of the free version, like the state file is
it's in the
on
SAS.
The Pulumi stuff?
No,
okay.
It's in the SAS. No, here's the thing. Like it's there's the only difference between giving us money for the SAS and not giving us money is like individual team. Think about it that way, right? You know what I mean? So if you're just one person doing this, it's fully there, like.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, so what I was gonna ask was, generally, and this is, in the old days, you had to worry about like two people running Terraform at the same time because you corrupt the state file. So then they added like, oh, you can make a Dynamo table that's like a lock, a lock table, and that lets you sort of serialize things. But like ultimately, that's all just like hackery for this idea that two people working on the same project can't apply at the same time.
Right.
And so presumably Pulumi support, once you get in like teams and projects and, you have hundreds or thousands of people collaborating, you need to be able to, serialize those changes in some way. Can you talk a little? I can talk
to you about it enough to say that is a relatively handled and solved problem. The specifics about it, I point you to the fact that this is Tuesday of my 4th week at Pulumi. So